Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. Is the war on Gaza and heightened tension across the Middle East becoming the new normal? Let's get to the bottom line. In less than a year, events that used to be seen as dangerous game changers are now seen as fleeting moments in the Middle East. Yemen attacking Israel and shutting down global shipping lanes. Hezbollah talking about bombing the headquarters of the Israeli Mossad. 100 Israeli warplanes bombing Lebanon. The United Nations announcing that it can no longer operate in Gaza because Israel has left no safe space for its workers. And throughout all of this, Israel's war on Gaza continues, with daily death and destruction for the 2 million plus Palestinians living there, with the U.S.-led talks to end that war still stuck in first gear. Is this the new normal? America says it wants stability in the Middle East and a ceasefire in Gaza, but neither of those things seem to be going in Washington's direction. So what does this mean for U.S. policy and diplomacy? Today, we're talking with Daniel Kurtzer, professor of Middle East policy studies at Princeton University and former U.S. ambassador to Israel and Egypt. Dan, it's great to be with you today. Let me just start. We see just ongoing turmoil and convulsions right now in and around Israel, in the broader Middle East, the Gaza crisis, now increasing tension with both Iran and Hezbollah. And I'm just wondering what, down the road, what does this look like? Is this the new normal?
Well, Steve, it's good to be with you. Look, this is the messiest the Middle East has been in quite some time, because we have seen wars between Israel and several of its neighbors. We've seen internal problems in Syria, Libya, Yemen. But here you have a combination of interstate and intrastate tensions and violence that presents a very volatile mix. Just the other day, Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly told a group of hostage families that he thinks Israel is facing a war of annihilation led by Iran. That's probably well overstated, but it can suggest to you what the mindset is of Israel's leader. Still in the midst of a war in Gaza, a mini war in Lebanon with Hezbollah that's been going on for 10 months. Rockets fired in April from Iran and still threatened. So it's a pretty bad situation.
You were ambassador of the United States to Israel. You know all of the players, the key players that are involved. Both sides look as if the most extreme elements in this are the ones that are getting the fuel to create the fires that they want to have. Am I misreading it? And there are a lot of victims and innocent people caught in between.
No, I think it's an accurate reading, but I would need to add to it that there's also weak leaders. So you have an extreme government in Israel led by a prime minister who's hanging on in order to avoid prosecution and accountability for what happened on October 7th. You have an extreme leader and an extreme movement that has run Gaza since 2007, Hezbollah, which is an extremist terrorist organization. And of course, we know Iran going back to 1979. But you also have weak leaders, the Palestinian Authority that now controls or supposed to control the West Bank, has been dysfunctional and unable to govern. And so you don't have the kind of strong, heroic, maybe transformational leaders that are required. And that's leading to this continuation of violence and of this crisis.
How would you rank America in that among leaders as well? Because I have to say that I haven't seen ever such impotent effect, if you will, of the deployment of U.S. power trying to influence Israel. I mean, maybe I'm misreading the situation, but I've seen open defiance of President Biden by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the sort of way in which U.S. power has traditionally worked to shape environments in the past seems not to be working in this case. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't think we're getting the same impact for effort that we used to.
Well, I think it's a more mixed, nuanced picture. The United States has demonstrated some great strength, for example, in the military deployments that we've made since October 7th that have played something of a role in deterring Iran from doing what it probably wanted to do, deterring Hezbollah from doing what it wanted to do. The United States also, over the past couple of years, formed some multilateral groupings, including India, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel, that hold promise for the future. So there is still some strength in American diplomacy, but this war in Gaza has certainly uncovered a weakness on the part of the United States in dealing with an extreme government in Israel. We know Netanyahu for many years has preferred a Republican administration and therefore has been less willing to abide by the demands, requirements of the Democrats, even though President Biden has basically given Netanyahu everything he has wanted. So it's a more nuanced picture, but one that doesn't portend well, because if we can't get the diplomacy right and we're still left only with the militarization of our activities in the region, we've seen how that has been unsuccessful in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and will probably prove unsuccessful here as well.
You know, for years, Dan, you've been writing that Israel needs to suspend any illusions of a greater Israel that it's going to achieve, that it has to set that aside. And I guess my blunt question is anyone listening to that? Anyone, I think there's often confusion between those that are pro-Israel and not pro-Israel. And you advocating for Israel to give that might, in fact, be the best course and most pro-Israeli course for Israel's future. But I'm just wondering, as we watch now operations unfolding in the West Bank, harassment continuing to unfold in the West Bank, if anyone is listening to your proposition.
Well, since October 7th, the situation has only gotten worse. The Israeli electorate, according to most polls, has moved right. It already was kind of center-right in a majority, which kept bringing Netanyahu back to government. But it's gotten worse since October 7th, given the horrific nature of Hamas's attack and the ongoing hostage situation. So it's not even a time now to be discussing a two-state solution. But the argument that I've been making since October 7th is that if we don't discuss it now, we are fated to see more October 7ths, because Israel's counterterrorism, counterinsurgency operation in Gaza will create more militants, more terrorists. And unless there is a pathway to an outcome in which there can be Palestinian self-determination and independent state, we're really watching a situation that will recur. It's almost Groundhog Day in the Middle East.
How do you get to an independent state and autonomy when you look at the reality of facts on the ground and you look at how Palestinian communities have been blocked off from each other, even in the West Bank? You know, I'm just sort of interested is what part of Palestine is available any longer for another state or for an autonomous region, because it's been dissected. I mean, honestly, folks, look at the map. It's an incredibly conflicting thing to be talking on one hand about the need for a two-state solution, but then look at the realities of what has happened since these efforts that you were very involved with to do it. I'd just love to get someone to answer that question.
Well, Steve, you have to look beyond the map today and envisage what is possible. So first of all, you know the old adage, when you're digging yourself into a hole, the first requirement is to stop digging, which means that the ongoing Israeli activities that have created today's map have to stop. No more settlement activity, no more expansion of existing settlements, no more dislocation or dispossession of Palestinians on their lands. Second is to start to turn that situation around. If you look at the way in which the settlements have been laid out, the bulk of the Israeli settlement population is not in the middle of the West Bank. It's on the edges along what's called the Green Line. And in previous negotiations, Palestinians and Israelis have agreed that there can be swaps of land of equal value and equal size to accommodate settlements that are along the Green Line, as long as the state of Palestine gets compensated with an equal amount of territory that's of equal value. For the settlements that are in the middle of the West Bank, there have been proposals over the years of incentivizing the non-militant settlers to move back into Israel. One of their concerns right now is simply economic. They invested in homes and in infrastructure in communities, and they're wondering, will that be 100% loss? So the government of Israel, the Knesset, can adopt legislation that essentially says we will pay you the value of your home and so forth in order for you to move back. And that will, over time, reduce the settlements issue to a manageable proportion. At some point, Israel will have to evacuate the remaining settlements. That's going to create significant problems, as happened in 2005 when Gaza was evacuated. But it's not an insurmountable problem. Second, in the meantime, the think tank in Aix-en-Provence in France has done considerable work on giving Palestinians much more economic independence even now, so that you can begin to divest or move the two economies away from each other without creating a crisis, but to give Palestinians an economic future that's different from today. You can't do one without the other, but it takes leadership. And we go back to the previous discussion. If nobody's going to lead this effort, either from the region or from the United States and allies, it simply won't get done.
We're in a political season right now. We have I just was both at the Republican convention and the Democratic convention. And as you kind of look at the tenor now of where this is as students are coming back, do you have any fear that match is going to get lit again and that the intolerance for debate and discussion is going to rise?
Steve, I actually love student protest and admire it. I think that the engagement of students in contemporary issues is a very positive thing. And if you go back to, our youth, the protests against the Vietnam War, these were serious efforts to bring to the attention of the American public concern about what American policy was doing in Southeast Asia. The difference today is that too much, not all, but too much of the current protests are based on ignorance. I've had experience over the past 6 months speaking at a number of universities around the country. I think the number is about 9 or 10 now, where students shouted me down, accusing me of complicity in genocide and arguing that the problem was 1948. In other words, the problem was the creation of the State of Israel, not the occupation of territory in 1967. This is both ignorance and it is a radicalization of student protests that is not going to help change policy. I think what the Vice President, Kamala Harris, has started to say is basically that you need to hold two ideas in your head at one time. One is that the United States, the public, Congress, supports Israel's right to exist and right to defend itself, but we also should support the right of Palestinians for self-determination and freedom. And if we can't hold those two ideas in our heads, then we're simply going to end up at opposite poles in this debate, and we're not going to ever find any middle ground.
I guess if you put yourself in Palestinian shoes, particularly those in Gaza, is there not a point that we just, when things go calm and peaceful and they so-called behave and are quiet, we think things are fine, when in fact they're not. They're bubbling beneath the surface. I want to know from you, what insights you have about undoing that knot, because I think a lot of people see an unfairness in our attentions.
I agree with you that when things are quiet, we tend to say there's no need for active diplomacy. And then when things become problematic on the ground, we say it's not the time for diplomacy. I think you're exactly right. But there are two different issues that we have to take a look and analyze. One is with respect to what's happening in Gaza, the administration must take a much more vocal and strong role in stopping the carnage, in promoting a ceasefire, release of hostages, return to some degree of normalcy, which will involve the reconstruction of Gaza. And in this respect, our policy has been too one-sided in providing Israel with what it needs to try to debilitate Hamas's capabilities. without recognizing that that in itself is causing future problems. But there's a second issue here, Steve, which we're tending to forget. If you go back over the years of negotiations, unfortunately, you saw time and again at both Camp David in 2008 when Olmert was negotiating with Abbas, in 2014 when Obama put forward a fairly forward-looking proposal to Abbas, the Palestinians walked away and didn't offer a counterproposal. In fact, in 2008, I was already at Princeton. I was out of the Foreign Service. I met with Ehud Olmert in Israel in the middle of his negotiations and said to him, you know, your offer is about 97% of what Palestinians require. Can you get to 100%? And he said to me, yes, he can, but he has not heard any answer from the Palestinians. In other words, there was no partner. We've heard that phrase often. There was no response from Palestinians. And so you have two different things going on. You have this horrible situation in Gaza in which the United States must play a much more significant role in stopping it. But you also have a situation in the previous so-called peace process in which Palestinians simply didn't step up to the plate, and they weren't playing in the same arena as Israel and the United States. And so if we do get back to a peace process, we need to expect Palestinians to engage.
Do you see anything promising at all on the Palestine side of the question of getting a group that will have legitimacy, that will have the support of the people and not immediately come undone because it's excluding certain players? That's another Rubik's Cube that we don't often discuss.
Well, sometimes an answer doesn't require a paragraph. The answer is no. I haven't seen anything to suggest that the end of this war, which will happen at some point, is going to lead to anything different. The administration, I know, has ideas of how to move forward, both in reconstructing Gaza and providing security and governance and so forth, while also trying to advance the prospects of peace. But those are ideas at this point, and there's no indication that there's active diplomacy to prepare for that day. On the Israeli side, there's going to be a need for a change in government, and the prospects of a significant enough change in the Israeli governing coalition are pretty dim right now, given the anger and angst within the Israeli public. And on the Palestinian side, the Palestinian Authority is dysfunctional. It barely governs outside of its headquarters in Ramallah. And so there's great talk of reform and rehabilitation, but so far nothing on the ground. So, I hate to sound like the prophet of doom, but we're fated right now to see this recur a sixth time. We've had 5 Israel-Hamas wars since 2007, and I don't see a pathway to avoid number 6.
In less than 5 months, Dan, President Biden will no longer be president, and there's going to be a new president. It'll either be Kamala Harris or it's going to be Donald Trump, best we can tell right now. And I guess my question is, does that choice matter when it comes to this issue? Do you think there'll be a discernible difference between how Kamala Harris might approach this package of challenges versus President Trump?
Well, it will matter significantly if Trump is elected, because we saw during his 4 years in office that he walked back and undercut whatever modest progress we had achieved until then. I'm not suggesting that things were honky-dory or were in a good place, but he basically punished Palestinians by moving the embassy to Jerusalem and taking Jerusalem off the table. He told Palestinians they couldn't aspire to a capital in Jerusalem by reversing U.S. opposition to settlements, by supporting Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. Trump created tremendous damage, which his former ambassador to Israel characterized in the title of his book as sledgehammer. He really set us back considerably from even the modest progress that had been made. So, I would argue, God forbid, that we face another Trump administration, not only on this issue, but generally on American domestic and other foreign policy issues as well. We don't know about Kamala Harris. She's been a loyal vice president to President Biden, and that has created Biden, the administration, has created its own set of issues that need to be dealt with. But her language, for example, after her meeting with Netanyahu in July, and even in her acceptance speech at the convention, suggests that there's some difference that we may see in her approach. Too early to tell. She does not have a well-formed foreign policy view on most issues, including on this issue. But at least it's possible that there would be some change in a Harris administration. There won't be change. It'll only get worse in a Trump administration.
Is there an understanding, a deep understanding in U.S. policy circles about what it's going to take to try to re-achieve stability in such an unstable place?
You know, understanding is one thing, but the will and the commitment to change is another. First of all, Steve, we're in a period of not just donor fatigue, but donor anxiety. Even before this war, the European Union, for example, was re-examining its aid policies because they said every time they put money into infrastructure in Gaza, it got destroyed in the next war. And here too, unless we have a way out of this recurring violence, who is going to want to put money into Gaza to reconstruct, rehabilitate, and make life livable when the underlying issues really suggest that things are going to get destroyed the next time around? And you also have the situation that Gaza, however horrible and terrible it is today from a humanitarian standpoint, is not the worst problem in the world. Sudan, for example, presents far more serious issues for the humanitarian assistance community because there is real starvation in Sudan, and nobody's paying attention, as they normally don't do, to places outside of the Arab-Israel context. So, to get donors motivated and to provide that funding that's going to be critical, and to provide the kind of support for countries to come in and help provide security and governance is going to be extremely difficult. And that's why I keep coming back to this idea. If you don't have a second agenda, agenda one is fix Gaza and let people live. But a second agenda is start working on the underlying issue. If you don't do both of those, it's going to be hard to convince policymakers anywhere to invest. That's just a reality.
Well, we'll have to leave it there on that somber note. Professor of Middle East Studies at Princeton University and, of course, former U.S. ambassador to Egypt and to Israel, Daniel Kurtzer, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Steve. Good to talk to you.
So what's the bottom line? One really has to wonder what the American game plan in the Middle East is. If it's just to exit the region in the fog of conflict, blaming the contraction of American power in the world on ungrateful allies and fanatical rivals, well, that's one thing. But if the U.S. is actually working to maintain its power and influence to generate long-term regional stability in a very complex region, which it says it wants, then America is seriously failing. The killing by Israel of more than 40,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children who are complete innocents in this conflict, as are most of the men, will drive hate and instability for another generation at least. Israel thinks it can make strategic choices for the U.S., but it's actually widening and deepening the problem. This conflict is far from over, and it could really break the back of American standing in the region. And that's the bottom line.